The verse of 2 Thessalonians 3:3 says, "But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one." The historical context of this verse is related to the persecution that the Thessalonian church was facing from the Jews and the Gentiles in their city. Paul wrote this letter to encourage them to remain faithful to the gospel and to assure them that God would deliver them from their enemies. Paul also wanted to correct some false teachings that had disturbed the Thessalonians, such as the claim that the day of the Lord had already come, Thesse 2:1-2. Paul explained that before the second coming of Christ, there would be a great apostasy and the appearance of the man of lawlessness, who would oppose God and deceive many people. Thesse 2:3-12. Paul urged the Thessalonians to stand firm in their faith and to follow his instructions, Thesse 2:13-17. The verse of 2 Thessalonians 3:3 is part of Paul's prayer request and confidence in the Lord. Paul asked the Thessalonians to pray for him and his co-workers, that they would be able to preach the word of God effectively and be delivered from wicked and evil men. Thesse 3:1-2. He then affirmed that the Lord is faithful, meaning that he keeps his promises and does not change. He also said that the Lord would strengthen and protect the Thessalonians from the evil one, referring to Satan, who is behind all the opposition and deception that they faced. Paul expressed his trust in God's power and care for his people even in times of trouble. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, which is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church in Thessalonica, a city in ancient Greece. The letter deals with some practical issues regarding the Christian life and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Paul was in Corinth, a busy and wealthy city, where he had been preaching the gospel for a year and a half. He had received a letter from his friends in Thessalonica, telling him about the situation of the church there. They were facing persecution from the Jews and the Gentiles, who opposed their faith in Jesus. They were also confused by some false teachers, who claimed that the day of the Lord had already come, and that they had missed the rapture. They were afraid and discouraged and needed Paul's guidance and encouragement. Paul decided to write them a second letter to clear up their doubts and to comfort them with the hope of Christ's return. He also wanted to instruct them on how to live in a godly way and how to deal with some problems in the church. He dictated his letter to his friend Silas, who wrote it down on a parchment. He began with a greeting and a thanksgiving, praising God for their faith, love, and perseverance. He assured them that God would reward them for their suffering and punish their enemies on the day of judgment. He also explained to them the signs of the end times and how they could recognize the coming of the Antichrist, who would deceive many people with his lies and miracles. He urged them to stand firm in their faith and to remember what he had taught them when he was with them. He prayed that God would comfort their hearts and strengthen them in every good work. He then moved on to some practical matters. He asked them to pray for him and his co-workers, that they would be able to preach the word of God effectively and be delivered from wicked and evil men. He expressed his confidence in God's faithfulness, who would establish them and guard them from the evil one. He also expressed his confidence in them, that they would obey his commands and do what was pleasing to God. He then addressed a specific issue that was troubling the church. Some people among them were idle and disorderly, not working at all, but meddling in other people's affairs. They were living off the generosity of others and causing trouble in the community. Paul reminded them of his own example, how he had worked hard night and day, not to be a burden to anyone, but to earn his own living. He commanded them to follow his example and to work quietly and eat their own bread. He also told them not to associate with anyone who disobeyed his instructions, but to warn them as brothers. He hoped that this would make them ashamed and repentant. He concluded his letter with a benediction and a blessing. He asked God to give them peace at all times and in every way. He signed his letter with his own hand as a mark of authenticity. He greeted them with love and prayed that the grace of Jesus Christ would be with them all. He gave his letter to Timothy, who was going to deliver it to Thessalonica. He hoped that his letter would help them grow in their faith and love and prepare them for the glorious appearing of their Lord.